In today's world, we have different gadgets. Our behavior has changed. We've adopted technology when it comes to our day-to-day activities. For example, if I had access to your phone, I'll be able to tell where your bank account is. I will be able to tell the kind of property you have and so forth. African Wildlife Foundation has the cybercrime program, which supports the demand side in terms of preventing the use of online platforms to communicate or to transact when it comes to illegal wildlife products and trophies. And basically, there is no universally accepted definition of cybercrime because it's very dynamic, it keeps on changing. But cybercrime is defined as any criminal activity that involves a computer, a networked device, or a network. So previously, you find that most of the law enforcement agencies in our priorities countries for the cybercrime program, that is Uganda, Kenya, and lately the Democratic Republic of Congo, you find that the law enforcement officers were only concentrating on the trophies. But concentrating on the trophies alone is not enough. We did a baseline assessment in the courts adjoining Savo Conservation Area, and we were able to sample 392 cases, out of which none had incorporated electronic evidence apart from GPS coordinates. When we say electronic evidence, we are looking at the basic electronic evidence like mobile wallet transactions and so forth, and also bearing in mind that these gadgets can be used to unveil the curtain when it comes to the other players who are integral in this illegal wildlife trade, space. So the cybercrime program was established in 2019. So far, it's been in existence for 2 years. We've been able to create 17 partnerships, that is both state and non-state. We've been able to support Kenya Wildlife Authority and Uganda Wildlife Authority conduct special operations, out of which 116 persons have been arrested. We've trained 268 law enforcement officers, 2 levels of training. One of level of training is we have the first responder, where we've been able to train 240, and then the second level is the expert, where we brought in experts from renowned digital forensics companies like Celebrite to train. They've trained these investigators and certified them as specialists. So now the investigators are in a position to present evidence as expert witnesses in court. We've also been able to set up a training and research laboratory, a digital forensic training and research laboratory at our African Wildlife Conservation Center. And basically there we have the capability of conducting computer forensics. We have the capability of conducting video forensics, that is CCTV forensics. We have the capability of conducting not only these Windows computers, but also Mac, that is a Macintosh machine, acquiring and analysis. We also have the capability of conducting mobile phone and drone analysis, and we use this as a platform to train the investigators. So at the end of this conference, we should ask ourselves, what is the role of prosecutors when it comes to wildlife cybercrime? And basically, from where we sit, we think the prosecutors should be able to guide the investigating officers from the various wildlife agencies on looking at the bigger picture. For example, if there is a snare that was found, of course, there is somebody at the end of this chain, like a welder who helped to piece up this snare for this individual. There is some sort of communication and so forth that can be used. The other thing is to make the investigating officers understand the various relevant laws that pertains to electronic evidence in the various jurisdictions. The other thing is also the prosecution should also be able to educate the court based on particulars of the case that they are prosecuting, especially when it comes to wildlife cybercrime. And this can only be achieved if there is proper pre-trial and just understanding the IO. You also realize that most of the investigation capacity in these wildlife law enforcement agencies came later after the other agencies like the police and the intelligence had already advanced. The other thing is the prosecution, the people who are present in this forum should disseminate the information once they go back to their various places of work. Yeah, and basically it is more to do with it's an evolving space, very interesting. Some of the emerging issues, as has been discussed earlier, are anti-forensics. You have the cryptocurrency, money laundering. We have dark web, and many more. The program under the cybercrime program, we also have other activities like conducting online investigations. What we have done is that we have collected a number of photos. We have keywords, the normal words that are used by these traffickers, and we have some sort of created algorithms online that can be able to pick on mentions, that can be able to pick on photos, and we normally get hits. That when we get a hit, it means we have been able to positively identify a certain site or account that has, or somebody is in the process of trafficking, that is cyber online trafficking, that is using the online marketplaces. We've seen a number of cases relating to African grey parrots. That is maybe in Kenya and Uganda. We've seen cases of trafficking of lion cubs from Nigeria. We've also been able to identify some websites in the West that are hosting, or they are selling, providing a platform for selling these animals. But when we engage them covertly, we establish that these are mostly trafficked from countries like in the West Africa, like Cameroon. The other issues to do with this investigation is that our position is we are not a law enforcement agency. When we pick up something, we report to the relevant law enforcement agencies for appropriate action. And I can see I am time up. Yeah, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Gina. And the takeaway from there is that, like most crimes, we do not have eyewitnesses. Therefore, the use of forensics is very, very important. And maybe if I can add on to what he has said, when we have cooperating witnesses that can allow us to use their gadgets so that we can try and investigate and connect with other people, it would be very important. So I think the use of cybercrime technology in investigation and prosecution cannot be overemphasized. I now call upon Mr. Kato.
Thank you, Dorcas. I'll begin by saying what does Space for Giants do? We have various wildlife conservation programs being run across various African countries, including our wildlife justice program, which looks at three broad areas: court monitoring, looking at how court outcomes are going on and what informs what is going on in the courts. We also look at or we work on capacity building of investigators, prosecutors, and judicial officers, as well as, where necessary, law and policy development work. Now, let me talk about some of the key emergent trends without repeating so much of what has been said already by my colleagues from traffic and AWF. Um, a couple of, let me give the background that around 2010, from around 2010 to around 2015 or so, our region was facing a very serious poaching crisis, as you heard from the Deputy Secretary General of the EAC. A number of our countries were actually included in the Gang of Eight for being either transit or source countries for this product. Then from around 2016 to around 2019 or so, there was increased efforts by governments and particularly the offices which are represented here to combat wildlife crime. And this led to the first trend that I want to point out, which is that there was, or there has been, virtually in almost every country here, an increase in the rate of convictions for wildlife crime. Secondly, that has been matched, however, particularly in this COVID period, by a rise in cases of wildlife crime. So, for example, in Uganda, the Wildlife Authority there has been able to record an increase of 125% in wildlife crime cases during the COVID pandemic. And the types that are most involved, as my colleague Julie at Traffic mentioned, is particularly bushmeat. Commercial bushmeat is the driving aspect or component of this rise from what we are looking at in the courts. For example, in Kenya, 50% of the rise in wildlife crime cases since the pandemic started, all of it is commercial bushmeat of very significant amounts of bushmeat. Now, the other trend is that a lot of the trade is migrating to the virtual space. As AWF has mentioned, we have noticed a continuous increase in adaptation of technology by the criminals to advertise their products, sell, network, pay each other. So wildlife cybercrime going forward will be a dominant feature of the kind of wildlife crime you will have to deal with as national prosecuting authorities. Whilst we have seen, as I mentioned, a rise in conviction rates generally, for example, in Kenya, in Tanzania, in Uganda even, the challenge has been that the persons who are being convicted, and this is the other trend, there is very low levels of asset recovery. And this is particularly challenging, especially in high profile cases. And this is where I turn to the issue of high impact prosecutions. For example, we've monitored virtually every case that has ever been done that you can consider high value in this region. The majority of these cases have always stalled. They have not been concluded, and they stall at investigation level because there is a lack of information when you send the investigators to get this information. Who is actually involved? The most you get is an agent or something like that, and not really the persons who are most responsible for these crimes. So there has been a stalling of the high profile cases. And this is very worrying because despite us recording very high conviction rates, For example, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, all of them have around 90 or so percent on average conviction rate on wildlife crime. But it is not of the persons who matter. It is not of the cases that matter. It is of the low level perpetrators. And this is something I think we should start working on. To address, I think, the way forward on these high impact prosecutions, I think we have to invest more on prosecution led and intelligence based investigations. Um, the era of leaving investigations to investigative agencies and wildlife authorities, I think should be long gone. National prosecuting authorities which have not set up their own prosecution divisions for wildlife crime, I think they should do so that they can lead or guide using their legislation or legal framework these cases. Secondly, and I want to mention, this is in relation now to the information gap that investigators keep finding out when you're looking at these high profile cases of who is most involved. There is need for countries here to start relooking at the import and export sector legal framework, particularly bringing in due diligence requirements for everyone who is bringing anything or out of the country, KYC. And I want to thank Honorable Haji, DPP for Kenya, for leading a national effort in this regard for Kenya. And I think other countries in the region would benefit from doing a similar approach where you address this information gap, because you can do all the prosecution guided investigation or you want, but if there is no information that you're collecting actually on the ground, then you have a problem and you will not be able to sustain prosecutions. Lastly, because of time, let me mention that there is need to address now this issue of how do we broadly ensure we have asset recovery being done. We have to lay the foundation for all our prosecutors to have the skill set of doing this, our investigators, and to this end, we have worked with a number of your offices here, plus our development partners who we partner with, for example, the UNODC, Traffic, and AWF, to produce rapid reference guides, which are prosecution toolkits aimed at gelling together the full range of the law approach, where you use the law as expansively as possible, while being very surgical at the same time, by ensuring you have a points to prove method and you can, collect the necessary evidence to succeed in these cases. So I urge the countries that are within the EAP, for example, South Sudan, and others who lack these prosecution toolkits, to work with us to develop them. There's need for cross-border training and collaboration, as was mentioned in other sessions. But we really need to, I want you to just think of yourselves as runners. Where I come from, we have world-beating athletes. It's the equivalent of having those Olympian gold medalists running on treadmill at very high speeds and going nowhere. If we don't get these high impact cases done, we will be not going anywhere. We'll have 95% conviction rates, but of not the persons, will not deter the crime. So let's focus on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kato. But I think PG Rwanda, who is one of our principals, will try and answer why we have delay in high impact cases and why we are not succeeding in asset recovery. But I want to assure you, just like in other cases, wildlife cases are highly organized and can be very complex. And if I give an example, there is you can Google, there is an operation called Operation Thunder in Brazil. And Brazil is one of those countries that believe that wildlife crimes accelerate climate change, is a threat to security and a threat to public health. So in Operation Thunder, they were investigating people who were trafficking protected species of bird. They confiscated 7,000 birds and they arrested 3,500 people. The investigation spanned many borders. When they checked their database, they found that these people appear in many cases of serious economic crime, smuggling of drugs, weapon, people, and they were actually pushing many birds into extinction. Now, if you have such a case as a country, there is a lot of mutual legal assistance and international cooperation needed. I'm sure that it might not be one of those cases that you might finish very quickly, and it is one of those cases where investigations might take very long. So that is how complex even a wildlife case can be. Thank you. PG.
Thank you very much, Dorcas. In dealing with this topic, I will share with you the experience of Rwanda and maybe some thought on how we can improve it, including the question you requested me to respond. There are some, in Rwanda, different measures have been established to deal with the issue of illegal trade in wildlife and wildlife products. And those measures include, but not limited to, community empowerment and the mobilization to protect wildlife and avoid any poaching activity. We do have what we call the revenue sharing policy. So the money that we got from tourism, those who live nearby those areas, they have some advantages that derive from the revenue sharing policy. There is an effective border and control, including the use of camera scanners, as well as the use of sniffer dogs to detect wildlife and wildlife product at the airport. We have also conducted training of investigators, prosecutors, and judges on dealing with the wildlife offenses in their respective profession. And also there is the implementation of the National Wildlife Policy and the EAC Wildlife Policy 2017 to 2022. But we have also enacted different laws aimed at combating those crimes, like the environment law with different provision criminalizing wildlife-related acts. We do have a ministerial order establishing the list of animal and plants protected species, but currently there is a new wildlife draft law which is under progress, and it will provide for more prohibited and punishable acts with the intent to protect effectively the wildlife. And this draft law, this law, when enacted, we also grant investigative powers to wildlife conservation officers. There are other related laws that, but the one that I wanted to mention here, we do have a law governing recovery of offense-related assets. So for those who have not yet have that law, maybe they can use this as an inspiration. We have ratified different international conventions and treaties, and in our constitution, international legal instruments duly ratified by Rwanda, they become part of the national legislation. So it's direct, and they are at in the hierarchy of norms, they do come at the second place after the constitution. So which means that an ordinary law cannot contradict an international agreement that has been duly ratified by Rwanda. But again, we do have a specialized unit within Rwanda Investigation Bureau in charge of investigating wildlife and environmental offenses. At the level of prosecution, this is dealt with by the unit in charge of prosecuting economic and financial crimes. We have also established the Financial Intelligence Center, but also something that is interesting is that the Rwanda Development Board has a department on wildlife conservation, and we work together. Yesterday, in my intervention, I tackled about the coordination and cooperation mechanisms. So what makes workable in Rwanda, we have built a strong domestic coordination and cooperation mechanism at policy and operational levels. For the purposes of effective operation on all matters related to security, including fighting all category of offenses, domestic coordination and cooperation, at each level of the administration, there is a permanent interagency communication between Rwanda Investigation Bureau, police, prosecution service, intelligence services, and the local leader through what we call Joint Operation Committee, JOC. And they meet every day and discuss all issues related to the security in their jurisdiction, including all categories of offenses that have been committed within their jurisdiction. They meet every day. Particularly at the national level, there is an exchange of information between the department in Rwanda Development Board that I mentioned, in charge of conservation, Rwanda Investigation Bureau, Customs, Financial Intelligence Center, and the prosecution on matters related to illegal wildlife and wildlife. Additionally, intelligence information related to illegal wildlife trade obtained by the is disseminated to Rwanda Investigation Bureau for investigation purposes. At the international cooperation, I think we said much about this. What we need, what we lack is not the legal framework, but even the existing legal framework. We are not taking advantage of the existing legal framework. For instance, in Rwanda, we have signed treaties of cooperation in criminal matters with some countries, and we are negotiating other treaties and other legal documents. It's a continuous process that we need to tackle. And we do have an advantage of being a member of the Commonwealth. And for the countries which are members of the Commonwealth, we can refer to Harare scheme to request mutual legal assistance. In terms of Article 1 of the Harare scheme, the purpose of the scheme is to increase the level and scope of assistance rendered between Commonwealth government in criminal matters. And at the regional level, Rwanda and the other members of EAC, we have signed different legal instruments, including the Protocol on Peace and Security, which provide for the cooperation on combating transnational and cross-border crime. So we need to sit together and see what we have and see how can we use. What we need most is to adopt some practical strategies so that we can get rid of the bureaucracy and long procedures that we talked about. We need to think about the practical strategies. That's what we need most. And we need to also think about other forms of formal and informal cooperation that we can use through international and regional organizations like EAAP, ISMALAG, Interpol. But even at the bilateral level, there are some informal things that we can do. For instance, Dorcas mentioned those long procedures when you start investigating those crimes for those cross-border crimes. But there's something that we do with even some European countries when we deal with some crimes like genocide and other crimes. So when we need to do like an investigation, or when we request them to do an investigation for us for a Rwandan living there who is suspected to have committed a crime in Rwanda, when they do it, instead of waiting the long procedure of submitting those things through diplomatic channels, we do have what we call any document we want to share, what we call advanced copy avance. So we send it to them or they send it to us. We start doing things so that when the diplomatic, a proof of a diplomatic channel maybe will be asked in court. But we can't wait that long procedure of diplomatic channels so that we can start investigation or do other activities. So we send them directly through email and we start doing things. So it's, if we do it with Belgium, we do it with France. So if we can do it with European country, why can't we do it with our brothers and sisters in African countries? So it's something that we can do. We did it with DRC recently. There is an investigation. There are Rwandans committed a crime in DRC. So we didn't wait for the diplomatic channels to be used so that our colleagues from DRC can come and we investigate together those crimes. So we used those informal, just communication by email, and it helped. Now the case is being dealt with in Rwanda. So because we are anticipating that maybe the lawyers, the defense lawyers would invoke that some documents, because in Congo they also did an investigation and they send us some interesting documents that can be used for the evidence. So they send it as advanced copy informally, but they also use the diplomatic channels, anticipating that if maybe in court the defense lawyers, they say, but these were not sent through diplomatic channels, we have that proof. But meanwhile, we did not wait for the diplomatic, the document sent through to reach us so that we can start acting. So those are the informal ways that we can use so that even those criminals, they feel that if you commit a crime in this country, if you cross the border in the other country is not a safe haven. It's like just moving to another province or area. So the criminal, we need to establish those formal and informal ways of doing things so that things can be quick. We don't have so many cases that we have prosecuted so far, but in 3 years we have prosecuted 89 cases related to wildlife criminal acts, and the conviction rate is at 95.9%. So it's a good record. So in concluding, in order to effectively investigate, prosecute, and adjudicate those kind of crimes, as I mentioned, the law enforcement authorities who intervene in this process, like investigators, prosecutors, judges, police officers, should possess enough skills in this area of law. And this challenge may be overcome by organizing regular trainings, because few of them have those skills. But also we need really to strengthen the cooperation that we do have. I think we need to sit together, and we always talk about cooperation, but they are not really tangible acts that we do. We leave this place and we start, if there is a suspect that in a neighboring country, when you request, then those procedures are applicable. We have been talking about this, but this is a high time to identify all the gaps that we do have, because sometimes when we are prosecuting this crime, some get frustrated. So we need to find solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, PG. And I think he has emphasized the use of reciprocity. I think we'll have to redefine what we mean by reciprocity, and we have to give it a wider view. And he has spoken about the policies and legislations that they have, and some are in the bill form. And I think for those who are dealing with legislation now, it might be important to look at what the FATF is doing. Recently, the G20, G7, and the UN called upon FATF to look at how the 40 recommendations can be applied into wildlife crimes. Because they said, why would people be trafficking wildlife? Why are people engaging in this crime? It's not only for economic reasons. Some, like in China, is for medicinal reasons. But even medicinal reasons, they want to sell the medicine, so it's still economic. So they are calling upon countries to look at the 40 recommendations, which are standards. They are supposed to help in mitigating, detecting, deterring, and punishing people who are involved in wildlife trafficking, and at the same time, asset recovery and forfeiture. So it might be good if you're a member of ISAMLAG, look at how the 40 recommendations apply to wildlife crimes, so that when you are reviewing your legislation, you can take into account, because it is an extra tool. If you have an FIU, you are a member of Egmont, it gives you an extra tool to trace and identify proceeds of crime. I now open the floor, and we have 30 minutes, because we have to finish by 12:30. I welcome your contribution.
Thank you. I have been away for COVID-19 testing, so I did not attend the beginning of these sessions. And this session, I have been waiting as a delegate from South Sudan, because as I talked yesterday about South Sudan is a newly country in Africa, especially on the wildlife conservations. South Sudan is a country having a lot of natural resources. And unfortunately, they depend on oil only after independence 2011. And this year's wildlife is affected by wars, either the war between South Sudan and Sudan since 1955 for 17 years. The affected is the wildlife used by the warriors or the warrior parties for feeding or either for selling. These 17 years, wildlife is affected. Again, 1983 up to 2005, when IFASA agreement was signed between South Sudan and Sudan, also these 22 years, wildlife of South Sudan is affected by the war. Taking the independence of our country in 2011, after 2 years, war broke within in 2013. Also, wildlife affected by this war. Again, 2016. Now we are in a period of reconciliation, implementing the peace agreement, revitalizations, and all this. And the resources of South Sudan depend just only on the oil. Now, when it is dropped due to COVID-19, due to the drop of the oil price in the international market, now South Sudan begin to think of other resources. Among them is the wildlife conservation. We are not using it because this is the war. South Sudan is the only country in Africa where fishes died naturally without being fished. No one uses of it. So that if we use it, it will be more than the oil. So in South Sudan, we have challenges of investigation as a public prosecution about the crime committed by the atrocities or the criminals. And those who were involved are the law enforcement agencies who apprehend the criminals and the exhibits. When they keep the exhibits and you open a case and you want to transfer the case to the court, you will not find that exhibits. Either poachers, either the skins, either tusks, you will find them, they were disappeared, and who is responsible of it. So these are the challenges. Also, the legal person deployed to wildlife conversation to wildlife or to Minister of Wildlife is from the Attorney General, not from the public prosecutions. Just wanted to advise them. But we will think of creating or establishing a specialized public prosecution attorney to deal with the wildlife crimes, so that we will benefit from these sessions and this workshop, and we will take it back to sit together with the domestic or our institution that are concerned about this. So I'm happy about this one. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would encourage bilateral conversations between you and our panelists so that you can explore areas of cooperation and assistance. Yes.
Thank you, Doc. Just I have a very short question for Mr. Kato regarding conviction rates, the conviction rates that you raised. I think in my office, there is a disagreement on the way how to calculate conviction rate. So please, can you tell us if you have some experiences regarding how to calculate conviction rates? Especially, is there any standard for East African community or in any country? Otherwise, it is very difficult. You know, year by year there is a different persons are presented for the office of Attorney General for Ethiopia, but the cases are the same. So how can your office help us on this point? Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'll say there is an international actually standard for calculating conviction rates, which is simply that you take in a given period of time, be it a year, be it a month, be it several years, you take the total number of convictions as against the sum, and this is important, as against the sum of the convictions and acquittals. And then you do a percentage of that. So if, for example, the convictions were 10 and you have 2 acquittals, your sum is 12, okay? Then you multiply it with 100%. And then you get your conviction rate. This is a standard that even I think the International Association of Prosecutors has adopted and has been encouraging prosecution authorities to adapt so that you can harmonize data reporting on such issues. The reason why you should not include, for example, withdrawals, which I think oftentimes you find that mistake. You find people taking the total number of cases which are in the system without considering at what stage those cases are. So if you include withdrawals, then you'll have, remember that withdrawals mean you can either restart that case afresh, or you just simply decided there's no point in prosecuting the case. So it should not be considered in your deriving the conviction rate. So we do that a lot in terms of court monitoring. And what I would emphasize is, yes, conviction rates in the region have actually risen for wildlife crime, or they're high. They're in the 85, 95% region. The challenge, as I have mentioned, is that, and I think, Dorcas, you are right when you're talking about the FATIV report. They are urging all member states or countries to really look into 2 areas: corruption, which is fueling these cases. One of the things that is coming out from the ongoing, I think countries are doing national review assessments under those, following that report. Kenya has just done one recently. And the outcome of that is very, very few cases of wildlife crime have corruption charges. Very, very few, even fewer cases have asset recovery elements. And very, very few have succeeded, especially the high value cases. And that is why I think it is important we then go back to ask what is the information that is lacking. And that's why I mentioned, for example, the initiative that DPP Kenya started on the KYC, which I think is important for other countries to try and adopt, and maybe you can guide them on that.
Any other? Thank you so much. My panelists must have been very clear. So I would call upon each panelist to have a minute to say whatever they want to say. A parting shot. Mule, you wanted to say something?
Yes, just to bring to the attention of the members some of the measures taken by Kenya in achieving IE-backed prosecutions. One of them is trial readiness mechanism, whereby investigators and prosecutors sit together and they assess the readiness of the case for trial. They even do a moot court, whereby one of either a prosecutor or an investigator is a judge, and there's a defense counsel, there's an accused person. That is one of them. Then the other one is litigation support by analysts who are able to reconstruct the crime scene. And we have seen this work very well. And then the third one is joint trainings involving even the judiciary, because sometimes they don't appreciate these crimes. And I'm giving one example of piracy cases whereby we did joint training with the judicial officers, because they did not appreciate how a crime committed outside Kenya's jurisdiction could be tried by Kenya. After we did joint trainings, we saw convictions because they now appreciated these cases. Then the last one is monitoring. We monitor the success of law enforcement in all prosecutions. Where are we going? Are we achieving what we are doing? That's all, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mule. But Mr. Kato's question is, how come we are not charging the same people with corruption? We are not employing asset recovery, and how come only the low level are being arrested? I think that's the bigger question. Thank you so much for those interventions. So I'll call upon my panelists. You have 1 minute each to each give a parting shot, and then I'll finish.
Thank you, Dorcas. So my parting shot actually doesn't pertain directly to bushmeat, but actually it is in response to the comments or the presentation by the Honorable PG from Rwanda. And I just would like to ask him if he's aware of TWIX, the Trade in Wildlife Information Exchange platform that the traffic is establishing in eastern, well, throughout Africa actually. That it is an online information exchange platform for law enforcement, including prosecutors, to be able to have that kind of informal communication that you are mentioning. So we don't have a presentation on Twix at this meeting, but I'd be very happy to discuss with you about Twix and what an invaluable tool it can be, particularly in response to your challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gina?
My parting shot would be, going forward, detecting of emerging crimes like cyber crimes and so forth will be very difficult. You find that if I decide to hide a flash disk on the ceiling of my room, it will be very difficult to find it. So there will be adoption of electronic sniffer dogs, which are dogs specifically trained to sniff out electronic devices. The other thing that I've seen succeed is the multi-agency approach. Like, we've been able to achieve a lot when we work with the Uganda Wildlife Authority and the Uganda Police Force. And then lastly is continuous training of prosecutors on the emerging technologies so that they can also be at par with the investigators and the rest. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Kato.
Just to say that Space for Giants, and we are ready and willing to work with all the national prosecuting authorities present to continue the work that we are already doing and the one that we need to keep on doing to address these challenges of the emerging trends that I mentioned and the need for us to reach that level where we have high impact prosecutions. Thank you.
Thank you. PG?
There's a lot that has been done, but there is also a lot that needs to be done. We should be the ones as prosecutors to find solutions that can address the challenges that we do have. And no one else will do it for us. We should be the ones as prosecutors to even influence the politicians on the challenges that on the solutions to the challenges that we do have. So let's use this privilege we do have of holding these offices and leave a good legacy to our successors. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And as I thank you for your attention, I want to finish by what UNODC said on the 10th of July 2020. This is what UNODC documented. Wildlife, forest, and fisheries crime threaten the rule of law, good governance, health, economic development of billions of people, and national and international responses are crucial to protect biodiversity and to achieve development goals. 300 billion is at stake, and the whole of government needs to be coordinated in each jurisdiction. It also noted that corruption facilitates wildlife crimes. We have to strengthen our institutions. We have to be proactive in collecting and sharing our intelligence so that we reduce the opportunity for poachers because they are changing modalities every day. Thank you so much for your attention, and I thank you.